all kinds of hackers, maybe our brain also needs an antivirus, a system that monitors us in our service, not in the service of anybody else, and gets to know our own biases and weaknesses and protects us whenever somebody is trying to hijack our attention or to manipulate us by using our own weaknesses. You know, the dictum, the recommendation to get to know yourself better, this is the oldest advice in the book. Saints and sages from Socrates and Jesus and Buddha have been telling this to people for thousands of years. But in the past, you did not have competition. If in the days of Socrates you failed to get to know yourself better, you were still a black box to the rest of humanity. But now you have competition. As you hear this conversation, there are all kinds of corporations and governments that are right now trying to hack you. And if they get to know you better than you know yourself, then they can sell you anything they want, whether it's a product or a politician. And since most people, getting to know yourself, especially your weaknesses, is such a hard job that many people may need the help of technology to protect themselves against the new technology.
So then, this gets to a point that you make in the book. They're getting to know us better than we know ourselves because of all the data that we are willingly and even unconsciously putting out there in virtually every interaction that we have every day. So, yeah. It seems as if part of what you're saying is an absolute necessity for our present, let alone our future, is the better regulation of who owns all that data.
Definitely. I would say that this is one of the top 3 political issues of the day, or should be, is who owns the data. You know, in ancient times, the most important asset in the economy was land, so politics was largely a struggle to control land. Then in the last 200 years, since the Industrial Revolution, machines replaced land as the most important economic asset. So politics became the struggle to control the machines. And now data is replacing machines as the most important asset. And politics is really becoming a struggle to control the flows of data. The problem is that we have almost no experience in regulating the ownership of data. We have thousands of years of experience regulating the ownership of land. We know how to do it. We know what it means to own land. If I own a piece of land, a field, I can build a fence around it, place a gate, I stand at the gate, I decide who comes in, who goes out. But what does it mean to own my personal data? How do I protect it? And data, unlike a field, data can be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. You can have as many copies of it as you want. There are quite a number of interesting ideas today about how to regulate data, but we have very little experience.
Well, also, I'm going to get to some callers here because there's so many who have good questions. But if I may, there's the presumption that everyone cares, but millions of people don't care. They don't care who owns their data.
Yes, because it's still not as big a political issue as it should be. And partly it's simply because it's a very complicated subject. People tend to care not about the important things, but about the understandable things. Mm-hmm. They prefer to argue about immigration and not about data because in immigration you feel that you know what you're talking about, whatever your opinion is. But with data, it's just so complicated. It's like, it happens in so many places in life. Like you have a meeting of the company staff, and you have two items on the agenda. First item is a suggestion of the treasurer to replace the pension fund of all the workers. Second item is which kind of coffee machine to buy for the office. You will have a 5 minutes discussion of the first item because nobody understands it, and then a 2 hours argument about the coffee machine. Why? Not because it's important, but because people feel they understand it.
Yeah. If I may, though,
Terrific. Thank you. Your actually was more of a comment. You asked, "Are we ready for the 21st century? Are we prepared as humans for the 21st century?" And quite honestly, I'd have to say no. It's evolving so fast, as you guys have been talking about, and like you just said, so many branches down the, in the conversation, so many questions coming. I don't think as humans that we're prepared for actually understanding which questions to truly ask and then what are the answers to get to. And a lot of the things that we're seeing today that we've had, just a couple of points. One of the things was you guys were talking about consciousness. Well, not too long ago, Google did a competition where it was a Chinese game. They set up an AI bot to learn the game. In the middle of learning the game, what Google engineers realized was that the AI bots were starting to talk to each other in their own language and were modifying the programming code. So much so, the engineers turned it off. Because they were like, wait a minute, we don't understand what's happening. So that was intelligence that was being created by the AI itself. A lot of the examples that you've talked about us being programmed, they all exist today. NPL is something that, neuro-linguistic programming language is something that has existed for a while. It's done on such a small scale on an individual basis. You're talking about basically using something like that in AI on a very large scale, and that's extremely scary to think about what you can do in controlling people.
Dimitri, thank you. I'm just going to jump in here because we do have to take a break in a couple minutes, but thank you so much for your thoughts.
Things are progressing at such a rapid pace that it is a big question whether we can deal with it, both as a species and as individuals. We have absolutely no idea how the world would look like in 2050. This is the first time in history, I think, that we really have absolutely no idea how the world would look like in 30 years. Now, it was always impossible to predict the future. You could never predict the political revolutions, the earthquakes, the epidemics, but still, throughout history, when you looked 30 years to the future, you knew how the job market will basically look like. If you live in the Middle Ages, 30 years from now, yes, the Vikings might invade, there might be a huge epidemic, but still most people will be peasants. So you know to teach your kids how to plow the field and how to shepherd the flocks and so forth. You also know that in 30 years, humans will still have the same bodies, they will have the same brains. You know that family structure and gender identities will be more or less as they are today. But in 2018, when you think about the world of 2050, we don't know any of that. The only thing we know is that it will be a completely different world, and that most of the things that kids learn today in school will be probably irrelevant by the time.
I was disappointed to hear your guest say that we don't know what the world is going to look like in 2050. We only know that we're going to have to reinvent ourselves. And it seems like we are going to have to reinvent ourselves because AI is going to march forward without any discussion in the human community that describes the value that it has for us. He says that we're going to still have the same brains and the same bodies, But this culture completely dismisses the human body as inadequate, and that we must do everything we can with artificial intelligence to limit the limitations of our corporal existence. I think we should ask ourselves the question of, why are we giving up on the human body, its limitations?
Respond to that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. First, I would just say that no, I'm not sure we will have the same body and the same brain in a couple of decades because of the development of biotechnology. And this is part of the danger, that we are likely to use the new technology to either replace or re-engineer even our parts of our bodies and brains. And the danger here is that we have no idea what the consequences will be, because we still have a very limited understanding of the true human potential. There is a huge mismatch, and this is throughout history, between the human ability to manipulate and the human ability to understand. In many cases, we know how to manipulate things, even though we don't understand them deeply. It's much easier to build a dam over a river than to understand what will be the consequences for the entire ecological system. For thousands of years, we have been changing the world outside us, even though we had a very limited understanding of the complexity of the ecological system, and no wonder that we now face an ecological collapse. The same thing may happen with our internal system in the coming decades. Up till now, we have changed the world outside us. From now onwards, we are also likely to change more and more the world inside us, our bodies, our brains, our minds. But because we don't really understand the complexity of the human mind, the full potential of human beings, the result of all these manipulations might be an internal...
Not to put it too bluntly, but so what? Aren't you also describing, what could be seen as the processes of evolution writ large?
Yes, but in natural selection, 99% of mutations are bad for you or ineffective. And the costs of making a mistake will be enormous, not only for humanity, but for the rest of life. We are now really becoming the gods of planet Earth. We are acquiring divine abilities of creation. And I don't mean this as a metaphor, really literally. Just as the Bible describes God creating animals and plants and humans according to his wishes, now we are gaining the ability to start re-engineering and manufacturing living beings, life forms. And we are relatively irresponsible gods. We don't even realize what powers we have. So my fear is that we will use our enormous powers without thinking about it too much, we are really conducting now an enormous experiments on billions of guinea pigs, billions of